Yo, 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 what is going on, guys? My name is Tyler. I'm part of the FF Mediators here on the Face Off Sports Network. We are back after a wild Week 7 slate of games with unexpected performances from the likes of Oronde Gadsden for the Chargers finishing as the tight end one, to the Steelers' 4 touchdown performance from their tight end position, all the way to the heartbreaking breaking performance of George Kittle and his donut. We will see where those guys rank here shortly. But before we do, just want to address the fact that 83% of our viewers last week have not hit the subscribe button yet. So if you can, it really helps the channel out. Just go down below, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. That way you're notified whenever we have all of our rankings videos come out. And then also just like the video. That way YouTube can kind of push it out to some others who can enjoy the rankings here. So, without further ado, we will jump into week 8 here. We will start off like we did last week with our buys. This is the first really big bye week here. We call it the bye apocalypse. So, you have 6 teams on bye. You have the Cardinals, you have the Lions, you have Jacksonville, the Raiders, the Rams, and then also the Seahawks. So, yes, there's only a few tight ends maybe that come from those teams. You've got Trey McBride, obviously a big name. Sam Laporta, who, while he didn't do too much this past week, is still a big name. And then Brock Bowers and the Raiders, we are hoping that he comes back healthy after the bye, which is what is being forecasted currently. But without further ado, let's jump right into my tier 1 here. You will see without Trey McBride missing, it is essentially the same as last week because these are your elite guys here. I have Tyler Warren at 1, Tucker Kraft at 2, and then Jake Ferguson here at 3. So Tyler Warren, he takes on Tennessee this week. They're the 8th best defense against tight end. He only had 4 catches for 69 yards and a touchdown last week, but he is just so consistent. You want a piece of this Colts offense as they are the number 1 offense in football currently. He is the tight end 3 on the season. So if you have him, obviously you're playing him. And I saw some crazy tight end rooms in there last week where people were asking between Warren and Kittle. And I advise people just to play Warren just to see how Kittle, kind of turned out. And if you did that, you had that option, you definitely lucked out playing Warren last week. Here we'll move on to Tucker Kraft. He plays Pittsburgh this coming week, who is the 30th ranked defense against tight end. He had 10 targets last week, guys. I keep telling you, this Green Bay offense needs a target presence outside of the tight end position. But until they find that, it will be Tucker Kraft. 10 targets, 5 catches for 58 yards, and a touchdown. He is the tight end 5 on the season. His yak numbers are still insane. I continue to see him being the number 1 option here for the Packers. And then number 3, we have Jake Ferguson, who is getting ready to play Denver. Now, with Jake Ferguson, right, we were obviously worried about CD coming back, and we didn't know how it was going to affect, his production. So I took the stance that I thought it would be George Pickens that took the hit, and that CD would get his, obviously, and then Jake Ferguson would be fine. And that's pretty much what we saw. So, yes, Pickens was still involved, but Jake Ferguson had 7 targets, still 7 catches, only 29 yards, which is not great, but he had 2 touchdowns, which kind of saved the week there. So, yes, floated by touchdowns, but still involved. Going back to how it was kind of spread around, Dak only attempted 30 passes. So, 7 out of 30 there, you're almost at 30%. And then he completed 21% of his passes. So 33% of his completions were to Jake Ferguson. So that goes to show you kind of where he stacks up in this Cowboys offense that is so high-powered and is doing great things for fantasy so far. Now, you're thinking, all right, well, George Kittle's not in tier 1. Where will he be? And that's where he lands, is here in tier 2. He is my tight end 4. Yes, obviously the donut last week hurt. He did have 2 targets, just wasn't able to haul in either of those. He was used primarily as a blocker, and you saw that with Christian McCaffrey, who in certain formats scored upwards of 30, like high 30s, low 40s in points. You could tell that Kittle being on the field truly helped the running game. And so he still had an 81% snap share. It's not like Tonjes and Luke Farrell and all those guys were playing more snaps than him or sharing a huge workload. And he is still elite, guys. Mac Jones is playing at a high level, whether it's him or Brock Purdy that comes back this week. I'm still rolling George Kittle out there as at the top of my tier 2. You'll see Dalton Kincaid on here. Now, he did have a bye last week, and before the bye, he missed that previous game with an oblique injury. So something to kind of monitor. He was day-to-day going into the bye. They do play Carolina, so they are 28th against tight ends this year. So if Kincaid plays, I'm playing him with confidence here in tier 2, and I think he will have a good game. Now, number 6, Travis Kelce. Everybody was so concerned that Rashee Rice coming back was just going to absolutely decimate Travis Kelce. And while he didn't necessarily have like a huge target game, he still had 3 catches for 54 yards. I believe 2 of those and about 44 yards came on like the first drive. And so he was doing great. The offense looked amazing. Yes, it was the Raiders they played, but Patrick Mahomes looks back to his MVP form. Rice being back, I think it only makes this offense better. And like I said, Kelce, although he only had 54 yards, that did lead the team in receiving yards last week. So just keep in mind, Kelce is still a valuable piece in this offense. Yes, it may be limited. It's not going to be those crazy fantasy games that you're used to from years past, but he will still be a valuable piece on your fantasy team. Now, next up here, I have Dallas Goedert at number 7. He let us down big time last week. I finally caved. I moved him up into this tier, and he really let me down. He finished with 3 catches for 18 yards and no touchdowns. This is just one of those things with the Eagles that can happen from time to time, and we will see how it continues to go forward. He was third fiddle last week. He was behind both A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, who had great games. The one saving factor here is Philly goes back to play the Giants again, who are the 10th best against tight end. But this is where Goedert shined. Week 6 against the Giants, he had 9 catches for 110 yards and a touchdown. I would assume they're probably going to try to take him away. And we can see that the offense can obviously move the ball without him, as they did this past week. But he's already looked good against the team once. I'll keep him here in tier 2 again for another week. And then we have Harold Fannin. Now, yes, Harold Fannin didn't have the best fantasy stat line last week against Miami. Quinshon Judkins had 3 touchdowns. Really, whenever your running back is that productive, you're not going to get a lot from your pass catchers. But that being said, Fannin did still have 5 targets, 4 catches for 36 yards, and Dylan Gabriel only had, I believe, 116 yards of total passing. So, yes, it wasn't great overall for the pass catchers, but I still think Fannin is by far and away probably your favorite target out of there. Njoku is still, kind of hurt. It was windy and rainy last week. That affects things. So with Njoku's knee, I believe it was, still being an issue, then you just play Fannin. He's been great all year. No, we didn't have the breakout, but I think this week against New England, I think he'll have a much better week. He led the team last week in receiving yards, targets, and receptions. So once again, I'm not worried about Fannin. He lives here in my tier 2. And then we will move on to my tier 3, and you will see the number 1 tight end from last week here on my graphic, and that is Oronde Gadsden, who we will hop to in a second, but we need to talk about Kyle Pitts first. Guys, the Atlanta Falcons offense is so target consolidated, and we love to see that in fantasy scores and everything else. They're getting ready to take on Miami this week, who obviously the Browns played last week. They're the 23rd best against tight ends. And Kyle Pitts had 10 targets last week, 7 catches for 62 yards. That target consolidation, guys, is insane for Atlanta. You literally, like, Michael Penix is literally throwing the ball to 3 guys: Bijan, Kyle Pitts, and Drake London. That's about it. Yes, he's targeted Mooney some. He's not relevant at all for fantasy. So you continue to play Kyle Pitts. I know people had the name fatigue before this year, and I was still in on him. I thought it was coming. They said it in the offseason that his connection was only growing stronger with Michael Penix, and we've seen the fruits of their labor here so far this season. Now, the man on the screen, Oronde Gadsden, the guy that I was really high on coming out of Syracuse uh, in the offseason, he had his breakout game this past week. Obviously, it was against my Colts. That's a matchup that you want to be targeting in the future. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But Oronde Gadsden, guys, I mean, what can you do? A tight end that can get you 7 catches for 164 yards and a touchdown, especially off the waiver wire, is huge. I told you guys last week you needed to go pick him up, but he had a good week the week before. He had done it again, I believe, in week 3 where he had like 7 targets. I cautioned people. I was like, hey, look, some of the pieces are coming back. Let's just wait. Let's see how it looks. And then that week 4 didn't do great, right? And so I kind of had a similar cautious approach last week where you missed the tight end one there, but it looks like the breakout's here, guys. I mean, he is so athletic. I think he's going to take over the Will Dissly starting tight end role. I think Jim Harbaugh will want to use him in this offense. Um, but like I said, he looked so good. I loved his tape coming out and playing against Indy. He had a good matchup last week. So this week he's going up against Minnesota. Obviously a tougher defense. They're 12th best against tight ends. So it's going to be a little bit more difficult. But the Chargers offense started to look even better last week at the end of the game versus the Colts. That kind of gave me a little scare there. But, the Colts pulled it out. That's great. I still love the Chargers team. I love this offense. I love Justin Herbert. And so I would take every piece of this offense I can get. And so with that being said, we will move on to the next guy here. That is Cade Otton. So Cade Otton is going to have some big shoes to fill here. Obviously, Mike Evans went out with a concussion and a broken collarbone during the Monday night game. I hate to see that. That streak of 1,000-yard seasons is coming to an end now, most likely. And then also, we still don't know how Godwin is feeling, right? Like, we don't know if he's going to come back. Egbuka was a game-time decision. So this receiving core is pretty banged up. Obviously, Egbuka played and did pretty well. Tez Johnson has shown a little bit, but Cade Otton, getting ready to take on the Saints. Last week, he had 7 catches for 65 yards, no touchdowns. And, Baker, he just missed a few big plays, right? He overthrew some guys, made a little bit more uncharacteristic mistakes for Baker. So I would continue to play Cade Otton with some confidence here as my tight end 11 on the week. Tight end 12, I kind of flipped these guys, last second. I was debating between the two, and that's Hunter Henry. The main reason why is because of the target competition. I think Tampa Bay probably has a little bit less so than New England does currently. New England does get ready to take on Cleveland this coming week, 16th best against tight ends. And the main thing with Henry, I've said it since the beginning of the season, he's just not getting the touchdowns at this point. It's Diggs, it's Boutte. They're getting more involved. Drake May looks fantastic. And so with that ascension, maybe he starts to get a little bit more involved in terms of the touchdowns. He had 4 catches on 5 targets for 33 yards last week. But obviously, like I said, no touchdowns. That's where Hunter Henry makes his money, especially for us fantasy players. So maybe he gets in the end zone this week against the Cleveland defense. We will see. He's being involved. He's kind of third fiddle some weeks, but you take a shot on the offense that's humming. And then here at tier 3, I actually have Dalton Schultz, who was not on my list last week, and that was a big oversight by me. I was trying to get things out pretty quickly, and he's been a consistent target for them, guys. Like, he's getting ready to play San Francisco this upcoming week. This past week, Nico went out with a concussion, I believe, in about the third quarter, maybe fourth quarter. We will see if Nico is back. I doubt he clears concussion protocol on a short week from a Monday night game, but we'll see. Schultz had 10 targets, 9 catches for 98 yards. At the tight end position, that is crazy. It really looked like C.J. Stroud turned to him after Nico went out, especially, but he was still being used before. Now, Dalton Schultz is not an explosive player. He is more of a floor play. I think the reason he had this score line is because of said scenario where Nico was out. They didn't really have anybody else. to kind of step up and take that, number one role from him. So I don't necessarily believe that script will be the same this week, but he has a good matchup. The scenario, especially if Nico is out, is definitely one that's more favorable for him. Now, there was a point later in the game where he kind of went down. He looked like he was somewhat hurt, but there's been no news of any injury for him um, since the game last night. And so we're going to see what happens. I would continue to play Schultz here. And then my last tight end was Zach Ertz. Now, Zach Ertz, I have some kind of issues with. He's getting ready to play Kansas City. Third best defense against tight ends behind both Buffalo and Atlanta. So you're going to have a tough matchup regardless. Jaden Daniels most likely going to be out with a hammy after this past week. And so that brings out Marcus Mariota again, who I warned people before. Marcus Mariota, he's got the rushing floor that he can use, but I'm worried about backup quarterbacks, and that showed. So when Marcus Mariota last played in week 3 and week 4, Zach Ertz had a combined 7 targets in both of those games, finishing as the tight end 24 in week 3 and the tight end 26 in week 4. So therefore, I'm not thrilled to play Zach Ertz. Really, the only reason that he's this high is on the chance that maybe Jaden Daniels plays. And just too, I still think, if he can get some targets and, Terry is still out, Debo is still hurt, and we're dealing with the likes of Jalen Lane and Luke McCaffrey and those guys, maybe he can PPR his way to a good day, but I'm not super stoked on him this coming week. So he rounds out my tier 3. Now, if you're not familiar with this, the tier 4, these are guys that I kind of considered streamers. Most likely you'll be able to get them off the waiver wire. Not all of them, but it's just I'm going to pick and choose some names from the list that we'll go over, and then we will just break them down real quick. So tier 4 here. You will see the tight end 2 on the week. Pat Freiermuth is here on the graphic. I have him down at 23. And the reason being is because he had 5 catches for 111 yards and 2 touchdowns last week. I mentioned it at the start of the video. The Pittsburgh Steelers tight end room had 4 touchdowns last week against the Bengals, who are obviously the worst team against the tight end position. And so with that being said, I'm going to jump up real quick and we're going to talk about Mason Taylor. So you see Mason Taylor is here at 15, and guess who he plays? The Cincinnati Bengals. So yes, I understand the concern for the Jets offense, right? Tyrod Taylor has now replaced Justin Fields as the starting quarterback. If you did not know that, that news came out today. Is Garrett Wilson going to be out? Obviously, if Garrett Wilson is out, the offense overall is probably going to struggle. But playing against the worst defense against tight ends, I'm more tempted to play Mason Taylor than not. And so, especially with Tyrod in, I think while he may be a limited upgrade over Justin Fields in throwing the ball, he's at least a little bit of an upgrade. Next guy on the list, Colston Loveland, going up against Baltimore. Now, the Baltimore secondary has gotten a little bit healthier, over the last bye week and everything. Loveland only had 3 catches for 24 yards this past week, but Cole Kmet did hurt his back, right? And so in a Ben Johnson offense, they love the tight ends. That's why Sam Laporta has stood out so much as like a rookie and second year. And so I look for Loveland to get a lot more involved, especially if Kmet does not play this week. We'll see the overall health of the Ravens if that helps, but they have been one of the most targeted defenses in terms of passing attacks, like defenses you want to target. So I would fire up Colston Loveland here pretty easily. Now, number 17, I have Chig Okonkwo, and you're like, why do you keep putting his name on these lists? Even though he's in Tennessee, Tennessee's offense is terrible, and guess what? They play the Colts. So, yes, last week Chig did not do anything. He quite literally had a donut, just like George Kittle. Also had 2 targets, didn't catch either one of those. But The one thing I will caution you is the last 2 weeks, Indianapolis has gave up the tight end 1 in Oronde Gadsden last week, and then the tight end 2 in Trey McBride the previous week. Now, do I think Chig is the same caliber of player that those two are? No, not necessarily. However, Chig is athletic. Indianapolis obviously has a hole whenever it comes to the tight end position. And so I would be willing to pick up Chig and start him this week if you find yourself in a position where your starting tight end is out due to bye or injury, and you just need a plug and play guy that could do something for you. You could do a lot worse than Chig Okonkwo. Number 18 here is Evan Ingram, getting ready to take on Dallas, which is the 15th best against tight ends. However, we all know that defense is not great. Now, they seem to have figured out something this past week against Washington. We don't know whether that was because Washington's offense, was a little hampered due to injury, or if the Dallas defense figured something out. But Ingram has got involved a little more over the last few weeks. He finally had 5 catches for 42 yards this past week. He's had 5 receptions each of the last 2 weeks, so he's starting to get a little more involved. Obviously, Bo Nix and that 33-point quarter by the Broncos in the comeback win versus the Giants was insane. So as the offense, gets a little more warmed up, I look for Evan Ingram to get even a little bit more involved, and especially against the Dallas defense, I think you could do a lot worse. I have TJ Hawkinson here at 19. I do believe Carson Wentz is starting again this week. And so with that being said, they take on the Chargers. I believe it's Thursday night. I think that's the Thursday night football game this week. You could do worse, right? Hawkinson missed a big touchdown this past week. Well, I say missed, but after review, they overturned it. And there was some controversy there. But, that touchdown would have made his week a little bit more tolerable this past week. So 20, I have Mark Andrews coming back from the bye week. Obviously, without Lamar Jackson, this Ravens team and the Ravens offense in general struggles. So we will see if Cooper Rush has figured out something over the bye week, or hopefully Lamar will play, but I'm not looking forward to that. Theo Johnson, yes, last week he did score a touchdown. I believe Daniel Bellinger also scored 1 or 2. So this tight end position for the Giants is one that they keep targeting. It's just you're always taking dart throws, and I think Theo Johnson has probably been the more consistent of those guys. And then you'll see Juwan Johnson has reappeared here. Last week he had 5 catches for 79 yards. He played 71% of snaps at the tight end position. Now, we'll go back a few weeks. Obviously, he's not had some good weeks here recently before this past week. And I owned up to that. I was like, look, you can't play him right now. He's just not doing well. But I will continue to reiterate that the reason Juwan Johnson is not performing is not because of Taysom Hill and because of Foster Moreau. Taysom Hill only had like a 16% snap percentage, and he had like 2 catches for 8 yards. I'm not worried about either of those guys as far as vulturing the receiving work. If anything, Taysom Hill will line up in the backfield at the quarterback position or like a wildcat, and they'll use him there. So that might hurt some touchdown upside at the goal line. But Juwan Johnson, I think you could always put him in and just hope he gets involved. Just kind of monitor it a little bit more this week. And then we'll pop up my graphic one more time, and you'll see Mr. Freiermuth. The Muth got loose this past week. Like I said, against the Bengals. I already gave you his stats earlier, the 5 catches for 111 yards and 2 touchdowns. If I'm taking a tight end from Pittsburgh, I'm taking Pat Freiermuth. He is younger, more athletic, the likes of like Johnny Smith and Darnell Washington. Darnell Washington is a mammoth of a man at like 6'6", 6'7", over 300 pounds. He's huge, but Pat Freiermuth really looked the part last week. I think with the Pittsburgh going back to Green Bay this week, who is 31st against tight ends, by the way, I think Rodgers will look to kind of put it on the Packers in a revenge game here, and we will see. Is it another episode of Rodgers' Revenge here this coming week? But let me know, did I leave off any big names? Did you see anybody or not see anybody that you were expecting to? Do you think George Kittle should be in tier one after a donut last week? Just let me know in the comments down below. Like I said, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. Those really help out the channel a lot. And without further ado, I will bid you farewell and I will see you next week.